cleaning lady approached a millionaire and told him not to travel with his wife. The next morning, there was a luxury car next to her humble house. Part 2. The days that followed. The next few days passed in a haze, every moment heavy with the weight of the truth. Amelia barely left the apartment, her mind spinning with thoughts of her father, Aurora, and the secret legacy she had never known about. Each time her phone buzzed or a shadow crossed the window, her heart would race, fear clawing at her. She knew Aurora was out there, waiting, watching. It was only a matter of time before she struck again. But she wasn't the same frightened woman she had been before. The fear was still there, lingering like a shadow at the edge of her mind, but now it was joined by something stronger: determination. Aurora had stolen everything from her, but Amelia was going to take it back. She wasn't going to let Aurora win. Not this time. Not ever. On the fourth day, her phone rang, the sharp sound slicing through the silence. She grabbed it, her heart pounding when she saw Julian's name on the screen. She answered quickly, her voice tense. "Julian?" His voice was low, urgent. "We need to talk. I found something." "Something big?" Amelia's pulse quickened, fear and hope crashing together. "What did you find?" "Not over the phone. It's too risky. Aurora has eyes everywhere. We need to meet in person." She swallowed hard, her mind racing. "Where?" "There's a cafe on the Upper East Side. Café Amelia. It's quiet, off the grid. She won't be able to track us there. Meet me in an hour." Amelia's hands were shaking, her heart racing. "I'll be there." Julian's voice softened, his concern evident. "Be careful, Amelia. Don't trust anyone. If you see anything suspicious, leave immediately. Aurora is getting desperate, and she won't hesitate to make you disappear." A cold chill ran down her spine, but she squared her shoulders, her resolve hardening. "I can handle myself. I'll see you soon." They hung up, and Amelia moved quickly, grabbing her coat, her keys, and the documents Martinez had given her. She was ready to face whatever was waiting for her. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her father's legacy, for the truth. And she was ready to finish what he had started. As she stepped out into the cold New York air, her head held high, her jaw set, she knew one thing for certain. Aurora had made the first move, but Amelia was going to end this game once and for all. When Amelia arrived at the cafe, Julian was already there, sitting at a small table in the corner. He looked different, his usually immaculate appearance replaced by disheveled hair and dark circles under his eyes. He seemed older, weighed down by the gravity of their situation. "Thanks for coming," he said as she sat down across from him. His voice was low, rough around the edges. He looked at her with a mixture of relief and concern. "Of course," Amelia replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "What did you find?" Julian leaned in, his eyes scanning the room before his voice dropped to a whisper. "I've been digging into Aurora's father's records. There's more going on here than we thought. It's not just about your father. This goes way deeper. I found evidence that Aurora's family has been involved in illegal business deals for years, some of which directly led to the collapse of several companies, including the one your father worked for." Amelia felt a chill run down her spine. "What does that mean? How does this connect to my father's death?" Julian hesitated, his gaze dropping to the table before meeting her eyes again. "Your father wasn't just framed for embezzlement. He was going to blow the whistle on Aurora's family to expose everything. He had gathered enough evidence to bring down their entire empire. They couldn't let that happen. They set him up to take the fall, and when they realized he wasn't going to go quietly, they made sure he didn't have the chance to talk." Amelia's breath caught in her throat, her heart twisting painfully. Her father had been trying to do the right thing. He had been fighting to protect people from Aurora's corruption, and they had killed him for it. She felt the floor drop out from under her, the weight of the truth crushing her chest. "All this time," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I thought he was just another victim of a random accident. I thought he was just unlucky." Julian reached across the table, his hand covering hers, his touch warm and grounding. "I'm so sorry, Amelia. I wish I could take this pain away. But you need to know the truth. Your father was a hero. He tried to expose them, to end their corruption, and they killed him because of it." Amelia looked down at their hands, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. Her father had died a hero, and she had never known. Her whole life had been built on a lie. But the pain quickly turned to anger, burning hot and fierce. She looked up, her eyes blazing. "They're not getting away with this!" Julian's expression softened, admiration flickering in his eyes. "I knew you'd say that, but we need to be smart about this. We don't have enough evidence yet to take her down. We need something concrete, something that ties her directly to your father's death and to the illegal activities." Amelia's mind raced. "What about Ronan? He's involved too, isn't he? He was part of the plan to kill you. He must know something." Julian's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Exactly. Ronan's loyalty to Aurora is shaky at best. He's in this for the money, not for her. If we can make him believe that siding with us is his best option, he might be willing to talk." Amelia felt a surge of hope. It was risky, but it was the best shot they had. "How do we get to him?" Julian leaned back, his expression calculating. "I've been keeping tabs on him. He frequents a bar downtown, a place Aurora would never go. It's low-key, out of the way. I think it's where he goes to unwind, away from her control. If we catch him there, we might be able to get him to talk." Amelia's heart raced. The thought of confronting Ronan terrified her, but they needed him. They needed his confession. "We need to move fast," she said, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her stomach. "Aurora's already on to me. She called me the other day, threatening me." Julian's eyes widened, his jaw tightening. "She called you? What did she say?" Amelia's hands trembled as she recounted the conversation. She said, "I made a big mistake. That people like me don't mess with people like her and get away with it." Julian's face darkened, fury flashing in his eyes. "She's not going to get away with this. We'll make sure of that." Amelia nodded, her resolve hardening. Aurora had taken everything from her. Her father, her family's legacy, her sense of safety. She wasn't going to let Aurora win. Not now, not ever. They finished their meeting quickly, agreeing to meet at the bar where Ronan frequented. If they could get him to talk, they could finally bring Aurora down. But if they failed, she didn't want to think about the consequences. Later that night, Amelia met Julian outside the bar, her nerves on edge. The neon lights flickered overhead, casting a dull glow over the cracked sidewalk. The bar was unassuming, the kind of place that blended into the background of New York's sprawling nightlife scene. But tonight, it felt like the center of the universe. "You ready for this?" Julian asked, his voice steady but tense. His eyes were sharp, his posture rigid. Amelia swallowed hard, her heart pounding. "As ready as I'll ever be." They entered the bar together, the dim lighting and low murmur of voices immediately surrounding them. The air was heavy with the smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke. It felt dangerous, but that seemed fitting. Ronan was there just as Julian had predicted, sitting alone at the far end of the bar. He looked rough, his shoulders slumped, his face tense. He didn't notice them at first, his attention fixed on the drink in front of him. Amelia's heart pounded as she and Julian made their way toward him. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but she kept moving, her fear giving way to determination. This was their chance. When they reached him, Julian spoke first, his voice calm but commanding. "Ronan?" Ronan looked up, his eyes widening in shock before narrowing in suspicion. "Julian, what the hell are you doing here?" His gaze flicked to Amelia, his jaw tightening. "And you brought her?" Julian's face was cold, his voice hard. "We need to talk. You can either come with us or we can have this conversation right here, in front of everyone. Your choice." Ronan's eyes darted around the bar, his posture tensing. He looked cornered, trapped. After a moment, his shoulders sagged. "Fine, let's talk." Julian nodded toward the back of the bar, leading the way to a secluded booth away from prying eyes. Amelia followed, her heart pounding. This was it, the moment that could change everything. They slid into the booth, the air thick with tension. Julian's eyes were cold, calculating. "We know about Aurora. We know about the frame job, the murders, the empire she's trying to protect. You were a part of it, but you don't have to go down with her." Ronan's face went pale, his eyes flickering with fear. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Amelia leaned forward, her voice low but firm. "Tell us the truth, Ronan. Help us bring her down. It's your only chance to get out of this alive." Ronan looked at her, his eyes filled with fear and guilt. Then, his shoulders slumped. "You don't know the half of it." The truth was about to come out. and nothing would ever be the same again. Ronan looked up in surprise, his eyes widening with alarm as Julian and Amelia stood before him. For a split second, he looked like he might bolt, his muscles tensing as he calculated the distance to the exit. But Julian moved swiftly, sliding into the seat beside him and blocking any escape route. His posture was calm, but his body language was firm, unyielding. "We need to talk," Julian said, his voice low and steady, the threat underlying his words unmistakable. Ronan's eyes darted between them, suspicion flickering across his face. His jaw tightened, his shoulders stiffening as he tried to maintain his composure. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice guarded. Amelia leaned forward, her hands resting on the table as she locked eyes with him. "It's about Aurora. We know everything." Ronan's face went pale, his body tensing. For a moment, she saw a flicker of fear behind his eyes before his expression hardened. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice flat, his shoulders squaring defensively. Julian's face remained calm, his eyes cold. "Don't bother lying. We know about the frame job, the murder, the empire she's protecting, and we know you were involved." He leaned in, his voice dropping lower. "You're in deep, Ronan. But it doesn't have to end badly for you. If you cooperate, we can protect you. But you need to help us bring Aurora down." Ronan's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing as he looked away, his shoulders stiff. Amelia could see the struggle playing out on his face. He wasn't loyal to Aurora. Not really. He was loyal to the money, the power, the security that came with working for her. But if he thought his life was in jeopardy, if he thought she was going to throw him under the bus, he might flip. After a long moment, Ronan's shoulders sagged, his defenses cracking. His eyes darted around the room, paranoia flickering in his gaze. He lowered his voice, his tone trembling slightly. "You don't know what she's capable of," he muttered. Amelia leaned closer, her voice gentle but firm. "I know she killed my father. I know she's ruthless. But you don't have to go down with her, Ronan. You can walk away from this. We can protect you. But only if you help us." Ronan's eyes flicked back to hers, uncertainty clouding his face. "You can't protect me from her," he whispered, his voice cracking. "No one can. She doesn't just protect herself. She erases problems. People who cross her, they don't just disappear, they're destroyed." Amelia felt a chill run down her spine, the weight of his words sinking in. She had known Aurora was dangerous, but hearing it out loud made it all the more real. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ronan looked down at his drink, his fingers tightening around the glass. "She's ruthless, cold. Her father taught her everything, how to cover her tracks, how to eliminate threats. They've been running scams, frauds, backdoor deals for years, money laundering, blackmail, even human trafficking. Everything under the radar, everything perfectly hidden. And when someone threatens to expose them, they make sure that person isn't around to cause trouble." Amelia's blood ran cold, nausea twisting in her stomach. She had known Aurora was corrupt, but this was pure evil. "My father, he wasn't the first, was he?" Ronan looked up, his eyes filled with guilt. "No, he wasn't the first, and he wasn't the last." Julian's jaw tightened, fury flashing in his eyes. "And you were okay with that? You were okay with helping her cover up murder?" Ronan flinched, guilt flooding his face. "I didn't know how far it went. At first, I thought it was just about money, embezzlement, fraud, but then people started disappearing, and once I was in, there was no way out. Aurora made sure of that." He looked at Amelia, his expression pleading. "You don't understand. If I tried to leave, she would have killed me too. She doesn't leave loose ends." Amelia's chest tightened, her breath catching in her throat. She wanted to hate him, wanted to blame him for her father's death, but seeing the fear in his eyes, hearing the guilt in his voice, she realized that Ronan was just as much a victim as she was. Trapped, used, disposable. Julian's voice was cold, unyielding. "We can protect you. Witness protection, immunity. But you have to help us. You have to give us something solid. Evidence that ties Aurora to the murders, to the fraud, to everything." Ronan hesitated, his eyes flicking between them, fear and desperation warring on his face. Finally, his shoulders slumped, defeat washing over him. I have files, documents, records of the transactions, emails, memos. They're hidden on a secure server off the grid. Aurora doesn't even know they exist. If you get those files, you can take her down. Amelia's heart raced, hope flooding her chest. Where is it? Where's the server? Ronan looked at her, his face pale. It's at her private estate, hidden in the basement, behind a false wall. It's locked, encrypted, but I have the codes. I can get you in. Julian's eyes were sharp, calculating. Then, you're coming with us. We get the files, we take them to the police, and we end this. For good. Ronan's face went white, his body trembling. If she finds out, if she knows I betrayed her. Julian's gaze softened, his voice turning firm. Then we make sure she never finds out. We get in, we get the evidence, and we disappear. Witness protection, new identity, a chance to start over, but only if you help us. Ronan looked at Julian, then at Amelia. His eyes were filled with fear, with guilt, with hope. Finally, he nodded, his voice hollow. Okay, I'll do it. But you better be right about this. If she catches me, she won't just kill me. She'll destroy everything I ever touched. Amelia reached across the table, her voice firm, steady. Then we make sure she doesn't get the chance. We're ending this, Ronan, for my father, for everyone she's hurt. Ronan looked at her, his eyes hollow. You don't know what you're up against. She's smarter than you think, more dangerous than you can imagine. Amelia's jaw tightened, her hands curling into fists. I don't care. She killed my father. She tried to kill Julian. And now she's coming after me. I won't let her win. Ronan's shoulders sagged, resignation settling over him. Then let's get this over with, before she realizes we're coming. Julian stood, his eyes hard. We move tonight. If she gets wind of this, it's over. We get in, get the evidence, and get out. No mistakes. Amelia nodded, her heart pounding. This was it, the endgame. They had the leverage they needed to bring Aurora down, but it was also the most dangerous move they'd made yet. As they stood to leave, Ronan's voice stopped them. If this goes wrong, we're all dead. Amelia looked back at him, her eyes blazing with determination. Then we make sure it doesn't go wrong. Together they walked out of the bar, ready to face the empire Aurora had built on lies and blood. It was time to end this, once and for all. Amelia stared at Ronan, her emotions swirling, a sickening mixture of anger, disgust, and pity. He looked broken, haunted by the ghosts of his own choices. He was weak, but at least he was talking now, finally. You need to give us something we can use against her, she said, her voice steady, her resolve unyielding. Something solid, something that ties her directly to my father's death. Ronan's shoulders slumped, his gaze flicking nervously around the dimly lit bar, as if he expected Aurora to materialize out of the shadows at any moment. His voice dropped to a whisper, his eyes wide with fear. There are files, he admitted. Aurora keeps records of everything. Blackmail material, leverage, receipts. She documents everything. It's how she controls people. If you get those files, you can bury her. You can end all of this. Amelia's heart skipped a beat, hope sparking in her chest. Where are they? She demanded, leaning forward, her body tense. Ronan hesitated, his eyes shifting nervously. She keeps them in a safe at her family's estate upstate. It's old, practically abandoned. No one goes there anymore except her. She uses it as a vault, a place to hide things she doesn't want anyone to find. Amelia's breath caught, her pulse quickening. This was it. This was the break they needed. If they could get their hands on those files, they could finally expose Aurora for everything she had done. To her father, to Julian, to everyone she had destroyed to protect her secrets. Julian's eyes narrowed, his mind already working through the logistics. Can you get us in? Ronan shook his head quickly, his face paling. No. If she even suspects I'm involved, I'm dead. She doesn't just eliminate threats, she erases them. But the estate isn't heavily guarded. Aurora thinks no one knows about it. If you're careful, you could get in and out without anyone noticing. Julian's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking to Amelia. We'll handle it, but you need to lay low. If Aurora finds out you flip, she'll come after you too. Ronan's face went white, his body trembling. I know. That's why I'm getting out of here. Tonight. I'm leaving the city, disappearing. If you do this, if you go after her, don't get caught. Because if she finds out... Amelia's chest tightened, the reality of the danger sinking in. But there was no turning back now. We won't get caught, she promised, her voice cold, steady. "We're ending this. She's not getting away with it, not this time." Ronan looked at her, his eyes hollow, haunted. "You don't know what she's capable of," he whispered. "You think you do, but you don't. She's more dangerous than you can imagine." Amelia's gaze hardened, her resolve burning brighter. "She killed my father, she tried to kill Julian, and now she's coming after me. I'm not afraid of her. She took everything from me. It's my turn now." Ronan swallowed hard, his face pale. "Good luck," he muttered before slipping out of the bar, disappearing into the night. Outside the bar, Amelia and Julian walked down the street in silence, the cool night air sharp against their skin. The enormity of what they were about to do hung between them like a storm cloud. Breaking into Aurora's family estate was dangerous, recklessly so. If they were caught, there was no telling what Aurora might do, but it was the only way to end this. "We have to be smart about this," Julian said after a while, his voice low, controlled. "If we go in unprepared, we're done. Aurora doesn't leave loose ends." Amelia nodded, her nerves frayed but her determination unwavering. "I know, but we can't wait. The longer we wait, the more time Aurora has to figure out we're onto her. We need to act fast." Julian stopped walking, turning to face her. His eyes were intense, his face drawn with concern. "Amelia, I don't want you anywhere near that estate. It's too dangerous." Amelia's head snapped up, her eyes blazing. "What?" Julian's jaw tightened, his eyes searching her face. "I mean it. You've been through enough. This is too risky. If something goes wrong, I can't lose you two." Amelia felt anger rise, hot and fierce. "You think you can just shut me out? After everything? This is about my father, Julian. This is about my family. I deserve to be there." Julian's face softened, his shoulders sagging. "I know, but if something happens to you, I'll never forgive myself. I dragged you into this. It's my fault. I should have protected you." Amelia stepped closer, her voice fierce, unyielding. "This isn't your choice, it's mine. I've been living in the shadows my whole life, afraid, invisible. Aurora took everything from me. I'm not letting her take my courage, too." Julian's eyes shone with emotion, his voice breaking. "Amelia." She reached out, grabbing his arm, her grip firm. "You need me. You don't know the estate. You don't know what she's capable of, but I do. I know her better than anyone, and I'm not letting you do this alone." Julian's face crumbled, defeat washing over him. He knew she was right. He knew he couldn't do this without her. "Fine," he whispered, his voice rough. "But we do this together. We get in, get the files, and get out. No heroics, no risks." Amelia's face softened, her voice gentler now. "We're in this together, no matter what." Julian took a deep breath, his shoulders straightening. "Then let's end this, once and for all." The plan. They spent the rest of the night planning. Julian mapped out the estate, detailing every entrance, every camera, every potential obstacle. They would go in through the west gate, the least monitored part of the property. From there, they would make their way to the main house, slip inside through the back, and head to the basement, where the files were hidden. Ronan's words echoed in Amelia's mind. "She keeps them in a safe, behind a false wall in the basement. It's locked, encrypted, but I have the codes." They had the codes, they had the plan, now all they needed was the courage to pull it off. They prepared everything. Black clothing, gloves, flashlights. Julian made sure they were untraceable, leaving no digital footprint behind. If Aurora found out they were coming, they were as good as dead. As dawn approached, they stood by the window, looking out over the city. The world seemed calm, peaceful, unaware of the war they were about to wage. Amelia looked at Julian, her heart racing. "This is it. We get those files, and we end this." Julian looked at her, his eyes softening. "No matter what happens, thank you. For fighting, for staying, for everything." Amelia's chest tightened, but she managed to smile. "We're bringing her down. For my father. For everything she's done." Julian's face hardened, his jaw clenching. "For everything she's taken." They stood together in the morning light, side by side, ready to face the darkness. It was time to end Aurora's reign, once and for all. Julian opened his mouth to protest, but one look at Amelia's face told him it was no use. She wasn't backing down. She had come too far, learned too much, and there was no way she was going to sit on the sidelines now. This was about her father, about justice, about ending the nightmare that Aurora had created. "All right," he said finally, his voice resigned but firm. "But we do this carefully. No risks. If anything feels off, we pull back. No heroics, Amelia." Emily nodded, but deep down she knew that pulling back wasn't an option. Not for her, not when they were so close to getting the justice her father deserved. The drive to the estate. The drive to Aurora's family estate the next evening was tense, the silence between Amelia and Julian heavy with anticipation. They both knew the risks. They both knew that if anything went wrong, there would be no second chances. The estate was far from the city, nestled deep in the quiet, sprawling hills of upstate New York. As they drove, the landscape grew darker, the trees taller and denser, the roads winding and narrow. The sun had already dipped below the horizon by the time they pulled up to the long, winding driveway. The shadow of the massive estate loomed in the distance, its silhouette stark against the night sky. The estate was exactly as Ronan had described it, abandoned, isolated, but still imposing. The old mansion stood at the end of the driveway, its tall iron gates slightly ajar as if no one had cared to lock them. Overgrown vines crept up the stone walls, their twisted tendrils like skeletal fingers clutching at the decaying facade. The windows were dark, cold, empty, like eyes watching from the shadows. Julian parked the car a safe distance from the gates, killing the engine as they sat in the dark, their eyes trained on the estate. They watched for any signs of movement, any indication that Aurora had anticipated their arrival, but the estate was quiet. No guards, no cameras that they could see, just darkness and silence. "Are you ready?" Julian asked, his voice low, his eyes fixed on the mansion. Amelia's heart pounded, adrenaline surging through her veins. She took a deep breath, her fingers curling into fists. "Let's do this." Raking in, they slipped out of the car, keeping low as they made their way toward the gates. The air was crisp, the night still, and every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig set Amelia on edge. Her breath was shallow, her nerves tingling, but she kept moving forward, her eyes locked on the looming mansion. The iron gates creaked as they pushed them open, the sound echoing through the darkness. It sent a shiver down Amelia's spine, but they kept moving, slipping through the gap and into the shadows. The mansion loomed ahead, its darkened windows like hollow eyes watching their approach. Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, even though the place seemed deserted. She glanced at Julian, who gave her a reassuring nod, his eyes sharp, his body tense. Once inside the gates, they moved quickly, sticking to the shadows as they approached the back of the mansion. Ronan had given them detailed instructions on where to find the safe. It was hidden in a small study on the second floor, behind a panel in the wall. Getting to it wouldn't be easy, but it was their only shot. They found a side door, the wood rotting, the paint peeling. It was unlocked, the hinges groaning as they slipped inside. The interior was cold, dark, and eerily silent. Dust coated the furniture, and the faint smell of mildew lingered in the air. It was clear no one had been here in a long time. Amelia's heart raced as they made their way through the hallways, the floor creaking under their feet. Every shadow seemed to move. Every gust of wind through the cracked windows felt like a whisper of warning. But they pressed on, moving deeper into the mansion, toward the study. They climbed the stairs slowly, the old wood groaning under their weight. The air grew colder as they reached the second floor, the darkness thicker, more suffocating. Amelia's pulse quickened, her senses on high alert. She could feel the weight of the house around her, heavy and oppressive, like the walls were closing in. Julian led the way, his flashlight casting faint beams of light across the decaying walls. The hallway stretched before them, long and narrow, lined with closed doors and dusty portraits whose eyes seemed to follow them as they walked. Amelia shivered, a chill running down her spine. At the end of the hallway, they found the study. The door was old, the wood warped and splintered. Julian turned the knob slowly, his movements cautious, controlled. The door creaked as it opened, revealing a room frozen in time. The study was just as Ronan had described it, small, cluttered, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves covered in dust. An old desk sat against the wall, its surface littered with papers and yellowed books. But it was the wall behind the desk that drew Amelia's attention. It looked like any other wall, lined with shelves and framed pictures, but Ronan's words echoed in her mind. The safe is behind a false panel in the wall. Push the third shelf to the left, and it slides open. Amelia moved to the wall, her heart pounding. She counted the shelves, her fingers trembling as she pressed against the third one. At first, nothing happened. Then, there was a faint click, and the panel slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a safe, black and gleaming, its digital keypad blinking faintly in the darkness. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. This was it. Julian moved beside her, his eyes narrowing as he examined the safe. Ronan gave us the code. Let's hope he was telling the truth. Amelia nodded, her fingers trembling as she punched in the numbers. The keypad beeped, the sound loud in the silence. She held her breath, her heart racing. Then, with a soft click, the safe unlocked. Julian pulled the door open, revealing stacks of files, flash drives, and envelopes filled with photographs. Amelia's eyes widened, her pulse quickening. This was the proof they needed. This was the evidence that could bring Aurora down. She grabbed the files, her hands shaking as she flipped through them. Everything was here: financial records, memos, emails, blackmail documents, evidence of fraud, corruption, murder. Her father's name was there, buried in the records, proof that he had been framed, silenced. Amelia's vision blurred with tears, her chest tightening. Her father hadn't just been a victim, he had been a hero. He had tried to expose the truth and he had died for it. Julian's voice snapped her out of her thoughts. "We need to go, now." Amelia looked up, her heart pounding. "Right, let's get out of here." But as they turned to leave, a sound echoed through the house. A low creak, like footsteps on the stairs. Amelia's blood ran cold, fear seizing her chest. They weren't alone. Julian's eyes were wide, his face pale. "Go," he whispered, his voice trembling. "We need to get out. Now." They moved quickly, slipping out of the study and into the hallway, their footsteps silent. But as they reached the stairs, a shadow moved at the bottom, blocking their escape. Amelia's heart stopped. Standing there, her eyes cold, her face twisted with fury, was Aurora. She smiled, her voice cold, cruel. "Did you really think I wouldn't see this coming?" Amelia's blood turned to ice. They were trapped, and Aurora wasn't going to let them leave alive. When they finally reached the study, Julian moved swiftly, his fingers tracing the edges of the bookshelf, searching for the hidden panel Ronan had described. The room was cold and dark, the air heavy with dust and decay. Amelia stood by the door, her nerves on high alert, her eyes darting to every shadow, her ears straining for the faintest sound. Her pulse thundered in her ears, each second feeling like an eternity. "There," Julian whispered, his fingers finding the hidden latch. With a soft click, the panel slid open, revealing a small steel safe embedded in the wall. It was sleek and heavy, its digital keypad blinking faintly in the darkness. Amelia's heart leapt. This was it, the files that could bring Aurora down, the proof that could end her reign of terror once and for all. But just as Julian started working on the safe, the faint sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Amelia froze, her blood turning to ice. Her breath caught in her throat as the sound grew louder, closer, echoing off the cold stone walls. She turned to Julian, her eyes wide with fear. "Someone's here, Julian," she whispered urgently, her voice trembling. "Someone's coming." Julian's face tightened, his jaw clenching as his fingers moved faster over the keypad. "Keep watch," he hissed, his voice low, controlled. "I just need a few more seconds." Amelia's heart pounded, her hands shaking as she gripped the edge of the door, her body tense, ready to run. The footsteps grew louder, echoing down the hallway, deliberate and unhurried. Whoever was coming wasn't in a hurry. They were confident, in control. Finally, with a soft click, the safe door swung open. Julian reached inside, grabbing the files, the flash drives, the envelopes stuffed with photographs. He stuffed them into his bag, his hands moving quickly, urgently. "Got them," he whispered, his eyes flashing with triumph. "Let's go." But before they could move, the footsteps stopped outside the study door. The air went still, heavy, suffocating. Amelia's body went rigid, her blood running cold. The door creaked open, the sound slicing through the silence. And there, standing in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the dim light from the hallway, was Aurora. Amelia's heart stopped. Aurora's eyes were cold, calculating, her lips curled into a cruel smile. She looked poised, composed, utterly in control. She wore all black, her posture straight, her head held high. Behind her, lurking in the shadows, was Ronan, his face pale, his eyes hollow. He didn't look at them, his gaze fixed on the floor. Aurora stepped into the room, her heels clicking softly against the wooden floor. She moved slowly, deliberately, her presence cold and menacing. Her eyes flicked to Julian, then to Amelia, and her smile widened, vicious and mocking. "Well, well," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Looks like the little maid finally learned how to play." Amelia's breath caught in her throat, her chest tightening. She felt trapped, the room shrinking around her, every exit blocked. The air was cold, suffocating, the shadows dark and consuming. Julian took a step forward, his body tense, his hands curling into fists. "It's over, Aurora. We have the evidence. Your lies, your crimes, everything. It's over." Aurora's laugh was cold, sharp, slicing through the tension like a blade. "Oh, Julian," she purred, her eyes gleaming with cruel amusement. "You always were so naive. Did you really think it would be that easy? Did you really think I wouldn't see this coming?" She took another step forward, her eyes narrowing. "You think a few old papers and some pictures are enough to stop me? You think that's all it takes to bring me down?" She shook her head, her voice dripping with disdain. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Amelia's chest tightened, anger and fear swirling inside her. She took a step forward, her eyes blazing. "You killed my father. You destroyed my family. You've ruined countless lives, all to protect your secrets. It ends now." Aurora's eyes flicked to her, her expression cold, calculating. "Oh, Amelia," she said, her voice dripping with mock pity. "You really are your father's daughter, aren't you? Always so determined, always so righteous. Just like him." Her lips curled into a sneer. "He thought he could expose me too. Look where that got him." Amelia's body went rigid, rage boiling inside her. "You murdered him." Aurora's smile widened, cruel and mocking. "He was a liability, just like you. But I'll admit, you surprised me. I didn't think you'd make it this far. I underestimated you." Her eyes gleamed, cold and vicious. "But it ends here." She turned her head slightly, her eyes locking on Ronan. "You did well, Ronan. I knew you wouldn't disappoint me." Ronan's shoulders slumped, his head bowed. His voice was hollow, empty. You promised I'd be safe." Aurora's laugh was cold, mocking. "I promised you protection, and you delivered. You played your part perfectly. Now, get out of my sight." Ronan's face crumpled, defeat washing over him. He turned and walked away, his shoulders sagging, his eyes hollow. He didn't look at them as he left, his footsteps echoing down the hallway, fading into the darkness. Amelia's chest tightened, her hands shaking. "You used him. Just like you used my father. Just like you use everyone." Aurora's eyes flicked back to her, cold and unfeeling. "People are tools, Amelia. You should know that by now. They exist to be used." She took a step closer, her presence cold and menacing. "And you? You're just another broken tool, one that needs to be disposed of." She reached into her coat, her movements slow, deliberate. Her fingers curled around the handle of a gun, sleek and black, gleaming faintly in the dim light. She pulled it out, her posture relaxed, her eyes cold and empty. Julian moved in front of Amelia, his body tense, protective. "You don't have to do this, Aurora. It's over. You don't have to do this." Aurora's smile was cold, her eyes gleaming. "Oh, Julian, you really don't understand, do you?" Her voice dropped to a whisper, cold and venomous. "It's never over. Not until I say it is." She raised the gun, her finger curling around the trigger. Her eyes were cold, unfeeling, her smile cruel. "Goodbye, Julian." Amelia's heart stopped, her body frozen in fear. The world seemed to slow, everything blurring around her. She heard Julian's voice, his shout, his body moving in front of her. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the room, loud, deafening. Julian's body jerked, his eyes widening in shock. Blood bloomed on his chest, dark and red, spreading across his shirt. His body swayed, his eyes locking on hers, filled with pain, fear, and sorrow. He fell to his knees, his body collapsing, hitting the floor with a sickening thud. Amelia's scream shattered the silence. "You killed my father," Amelia said, her voice steady but laced with fury. Her hands were trembling, but she held her ground, her eyes locked on Aurora's. "And now? You're gonna pay for it." Aurora's smile faltered for a brief moment, a flicker of something dark and dangerous crossing her face. Her posture straightened, her eyes narrowing. "Your father was a fool," she spat, her voice cold and unfeeling. "He thought he could outsmart my family. He thought he could expose us, take us down. But we handled him, just like I'm going to handle you." Before either Amelia or Julian could react, Aurora snapped her fingers. The sound echoed through the room, sharp and commanding. From the shadows, Ronan stepped into the light, his expression hollow, his shoulders slumped. In his hand he held a gun, the metal gleaming coldly in the dim light. Amelia's heart dropped, her body going cold. No, not Ronan. His eyes were filled with regret, his face pale, his hands shaking. "I didn't want it to come to this," he muttered, his voice low, broken. "But Aurora, she doesn't leave loose ends." Julian tensed beside Amelia, his posture rigid, his eyes flicking between Ronan and Aurora. "You don't have to do this, Ronan," he said, his voice calm, steady. "You can walk away from this. We can protect you. Just put the gun down." Ronan's gaze flickered, his eyes flicking to Aurora. For a split second, Amelia saw the uncertainty in his face, the fear. He wasn't a killer, not really. He was just as trapped as they were. But then, Aurora stepped closer, her heels clicking softly against the wooden floor, her presence cold and commanding. Her voice was low, dangerous. "Ronan, if you don't take care of this, I will. And believe me, it'll be a big mess if I do." Her eyes were cold, unfeeling, her face a mask of cruelty. Ronan's grip on the gun tightened, his jaw clenching. His hand trembled, the barrel shaking slightly as he pointed it at Amelia. Her breath was shallow, her heart pounding as her mind raced, searching for a way out. She knew Ronan wasn't loyal to Aurora. He was just scared. And scared people made mistakes. She took a small step forward, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Ronan," she said softly, her voice gentle, pleading. "You don't have to do this. She's using you. If you go through with this, you'll never be free of her." Aurora's eyes narrowed, her face twisting in anger, but Amelia pressed on, her voice firm, steady. "If you pull that trigger, your life will always belong to her. But if you help us, you can walk away. You can start over. You don't have to be her pawn anymore." Ronan's face crumpled, his eyes flicking between Amelia and Aurora, torn between his fear of Aurora and the hope of escape. His hand shook, his body trembling. For a moment the room was silent, the tension suffocating. Aurora took a step closer, her voice low and vicious. "Ronan, don't be stupid. You know what I'll do to you if you don't handle this." Her eyes were cold, unforgiving. "Pull the trigger, now." Ronan's hand wavered, the gun shaking violently. Amelia held her breath, her heart pounding, her eyes locked on his. She could see the war raging inside him, the fear, the guilt, the desperation. "Please, Ronan, do the right thing." His eyes softened, his shoulders slumping. He looked at Amelia, his face twisted with sorrow, regret. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. His grip on the gun loosened, his arm dropping to his side. I can't do it." Aurora's eyes flared with fury. "You coward!" she screamed, her voice sharp and venomous. Her body tensed, her muscles coiling as she lunged toward him, her face contorted with rage. But Julian was faster. He moved swiftly, stepping between Aurora and Ronan, his hand shooting out to grab Aurora's arm. In one fluid motion, he twisted her arm behind her back, his movements controlled, precise. Aurora cried out in pain, her body jerking as she struggled against his grip, but Julian held her firmly, his jaw clenched, his eyes cold. "Ronan, get the gun," Julian barked, his voice hard, commanding. Ronan hesitated, his eyes wide with shock, his body frozen. But then he moved, bending down and picking up the gun from where he had dropped it. He stood there, his shoulders tense, his face pale, the gun shaking in his hand. Amelia's pulse raced, adrenaline flooding her veins. They had Aurora. They had the files, everything they needed to end this nightmare once and for all. But as she looked at Aurora, saw the rage in her eyes, the hate, the cold, calculating fury, she knew this wasn't over. Aurora struggled against Julian's grip, her body twisting, her teeth bared. "You think you've won?" she spat, her voice cold, venomous. "You think this is over? I own this city. I own everyone in it. You think you can stop me?" She laughed, the sound sharp, cruel. "I'll destroy you. I'll destroy everything you love." Amelia stepped forward, her eyes blazing with fury. "You already took everything from me. You took my father, my family, my life, but you don't get to take anything else." She moved closer, her voice low, steady. "It's over, Aurora. You've lost." Aurora's eyes narrowed, her face twisting with hate. "You think you're better than me? You're nothing, just a maid playing hero. You're weak, pathetic." Amelia's jaw tightened, her hands curling into fists. "I'm stronger than you'll ever be. Because I don't need to lie, to cheat, to kill just to stay in control. You're weak, Aurora, and that's why you're going to lose." Aurora's face crumpled, her body going rigid. She let out a furious scream, her body twisting violently. She slammed her head back, catching Julian off guard. He grunted, his grip loosening for a split second, just long enough for Aurora to break free. She spun around, her movements quick, vicious. Her hand shot out, grabbing the gun from Ronan's shaking hands. Her eyes were wild, her face contorted with rage. She raised the gun, her finger curling around the trigger. Amelia's body went cold, her breath catching in her throat. She saw the hate in Aurora's eyes, the cold, unfeeling cruelty. She didn't hesitate. She didn't waver. There was a loud crack, the sound echoing through the room. Aurora's body jerked, her eyes widening in shock. Blood bloomed on her chest, dark and red, spreading across her shirt. Her mouth opened, a silent scream escaping her lips. Her body swayed, her eyes locking on Amelia's, filled with disbelief, with anger, with fear. She fell to her knees, her body collapsing, hitting the floor with a heavy thud. The room went silent, the air heavy, suffocating. Amelia's body trembled, her breath shallow. She looked at the gun in her own hands, her fingers wrapped around the cold metal. She didn't remember grabbing it. She didn't remember pulling the trigger. All she remembered was Aurora's eyes, cold and cruel, and the sound of her voice. "Your father was a fool." It was over. Aurora was dead. Aurora struggled against the ropes binding her wrists, her face contorted with fury. "You think this is over?" she spat, her voice laced with venom. Her eyes were cold, burning with rage as she glared at Julian and Amelia from the back seat. "You think you've won?" Julian's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, his jaw clenched as he kept his gaze on the road. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel, his shoulders tense. "It's over, Aurora. You're finished." But Aurora's smile returned, slow, dangerous, and unsettling. It was the smile of a predator who knew the hunt wasn't over yet. "You're a fool, Julian. You've always been a fool. Do you really think I don't have a plan for this?" Amelia's heart sank as Aurora's words hit her like a slap to the face. Of course, Aurora had a plan. She always did. She wasn't the type to go down without a fight. Suddenly, the sound of approaching engines cut through the night air. Amelia's blood ran cold, her head snapping around to look out the back window. Headlights appeared in the distance, piercing through the darkness. Multiple cars, fast, closing in on them. Julian's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. "We've got company." Amelia's chest tightened, panic clawing at her throat. "Aurora's men, they found us." Aurora's laughter filled the car, cold and mocking. "Did you really think you could take me down so easily? Did you really think I'd be stupid enough not to have backup?" Her eyes gleamed with malice. "You're all dead. You don't even realize it yet." Julian's face hardened, his foot pressing down on the accelerator. The car lurched forward, speeding down the dark highway as the engines behind them roared to life, giving chase. Amelia's pulse raced, adrenaline flooding her veins. She turned to Julian, her voice urgent. "What do we do?" Julian's eyes were cold, focused. "We run." The car sped down the winding road, the dark trees flashing by as they raced through the night. The pursuing cars gained on them, their headlights glaring, their engines roaring. Amelia's heart thundered in her chest, fear tightening around her like a vice. Julian's hands were steady on the wheel, his voice low and controlled. "Hold on." The car swerved sharply, tires screeching as Julian took a sharp turn, the vehicle skidding before gaining traction again. Behind them, the pursuing cars followed, their headlights weaving through the darkness like predators closing in on their prey. Aurora leaned forward, her face close to Amelia's, her voice a cold whisper. "You think you've won? You think you can run from me? My family owns this city. You're nothing. You're already dead." Amelia's chest tightened, anger flaring hot and fierce. She turned to Aurora, her eyes blazing. "You don't own me, not anymore." Aurora's smile widened, cruel and mocking. "We'll see about that." Gunshots shattered the night air, loud and sharp. Bullets whizzed past the car, one hitting the rear window, shattering the glass. Amelia ducked, her heart leaping into her throat as shards of glass rained down around her. Julian swore under his breath, his grip tightening on the wheel as he sped up, the car jerking as it flew over a bump in the road. "They're trying to take out the tires. Hold on." Amelia gripped the seat, her body tense as Julian swerved again, narrowly avoiding another hail of bullets. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her mind racing. They weren't going to make it. Not like this. She turned to Aurora, fury burning in her chest. "Call them off!" Aurora's eyes gleamed, her smile wicked. "Why would I do that?" Amelia's fists clenched, her body shaking with rage. "If we go down, you go down with us." Aurora's expression faltered, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face, but then her eyes hardened, her chin lifting defiantly. "I always have a way out." Amelia's blood ran cold. Of course she did. Suddenly Ronan's voice cut through the chaos, his tone urgent, panicked. "There's a side road up ahead. If we take it, we can lose them in the woods." Julian's eyes flicked to the mirror, the pursuing cars gaining on them. "You sure?" Ronan nodded, his eyes wide with fear. "It's our only shot." Julian's jaw clenched, his eyes flashing with determination. "Hold on." He jerked the wheel to the right, the car skidding as they veered off the main road, crashing through the undergrowth as they plunged into the dark forest. Branches scraped against the windows, the car bouncing over the uneven terrain. Behind them, the pursuing cars overshot the turn, their headlights disappearing into the distance. Amelia's heart raced, her body jostling against the seat as they sped through the dense woods. The darkness was suffocating, the trees pressing in on them from all sides. But they were getting away. They were getting away. Aurora's voice cut through the darkness, cold and sharp. "This isn't over. You can run, but you can't hide. You'll never be safe. Not from me. Not from my family." Amelia turned to her, her eyes hard, her voice steady. "Maybe not, but at least we're free of you." Aurora's face twisted with fury, her body straining against the ropes. "You think you've won? You think you can stop me? I am this city. I own everything." Amelia leaned in, her voice low, cold. "Not anymore. You've lost." Aurora's eyes burned with rage, her body shaking with fury, but she didn't speak. She just sat there, her face contorted with anger, her eyes cold and calculating. Julian's voice broke through the tension, his tone grim. "We've got to get these files to Martinez. It's the only way to end this." Amelia nodded, her heart pounding. "We end this tonight. No more running, no more fear." Julian's eyes were hard, his jaw clenched. "Agreed." They sped through the dark forest, the car bouncing over rocks and roots, the shadows closing in around them. Aurora sat in the back seat, her wrists bound, her eyes cold and furious. But for the first time, Amelia saw something else in Aurora's eyes: fear. Aurora was afraid. Amelia's chest tightened, her breath catching. They could do this. They could really end this. They burst out of the woods, the car flying onto a dirt road that led back to the main highway. Julian floored the gas, the car roaring as they sped toward the city, toward Martinez, toward justice. Aurora's voice was cold, venomous. "You don't know what you're doing. You don't know who you're dealing with." Amelia turned to her, her eyes fierce, unyielding. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. A liar, a murderer, and a coward." Aurora's face went pale, her lips pressing into a thin line. Amelia's voice was steady, strong. "You're done, Aurora. This ends tonight." The city lights appeared on the horizon, bright and brilliant against the night sky. They were going to end this, once and for all. But even as the cold metal snapped around her wrists, Aurora's smile didn't falter. It grew wider, more menacing, her eyes gleaming with a dangerous light. She looked up at Martinez, her expression calm, almost serene. "You really don't understand, do you?" she said, her voice soft, mocking. "You think you've won?" Martinez's jaw tightened, his grip on her arm firm. "Save it, Aurora, this is over." Aurora's laugh was low, chilling, the sound echoing off the cold, empty walls of the warehouse. "Over? Oh, tracker, this has only just begun." Her eyes flicked to Amelia, her gaze cold and unfeeling. "You still don't get it, do you? You think you're the hero in this story? You think you're going to walk away from this?" She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You've signed your own death warrant, little maid." Amelia's blood ran cold, fear clawing at her chest, but she refused to show it. She straightened her shoulders, meeting Aurora's gaze with a fierce glare. "Your games are over, Aurora. You can't hurt anyone anymore." Aurora's eyes sparkled with cruel amusement. "Oh, sweetheart, I don't need to. They'll do it for me." Before anyone could react, the lights in the warehouse went out, plunging them into darkness. The sudden blackness was suffocating, disorienting. Amelia's heart skipped a beat, panic surging through her. She heard a scuffle, a grunt of pain, then a crash as something heavy hit the floor. "Shoo! Hee!" Her voice echoing through the darkness, a gunshot rang out, the sharp crack splitting the air, reverberating off the metal walls. Amelia dropped to the ground instinctively, her hands covering her head as chaos erupted around her. She heard Martinez shouting orders, the sound of footsteps thundering across the floor, more gunshots echoing through the vast space. She crawled toward the last place she had seen Julian, her heart racing, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Her fingers brushed against something cold, something wet. Her stomach twisted as she realized it was blood. "Julian," she whispered, her voice trembling, her fingers shaking as she reached out, searching. "Julian, where are you?" The lights flickered back on, the harsh fluorescent bulbs buzzing overhead, revealing the carnage around her. Martinez was pinned to the floor, two of Aurora's men holding him down, his face bloody, his eyes blazing with fury. His officers were scattered across the room, disarmed, overpowered. And in the center of the room stood Aurora. Her posture straight, poised, her hands no longer bound. In her grip was a gun, the barrel still smoking. She stood over Julian's body, her eyes cold, her expression triumphant. Amelia's breath caught in her throat, her heart shattering as she saw Julian lying motionless on the floor, blood pooling beneath him. His face was pale, his eyes closed, his body still. "No," Amelia whispered, tears flooding her eyes, her chest tightening. "No, Julian." Aurora's eyes flicked to Amelia, her smile widening. "You thought you could win? You thought you could take me down?" She let out a low, mocking laugh. "You really are pathetic." Amelia's body shook with anger, grief, and fear. Her fists clenched, her nails digging into her palms, her vision blurring with tears. But underneath the pain, a fire burned, hot, fierce, consuming. She pushed herself to her feet, her body trembling, her eyes blazing with fury. You monster!" Aurora tilted her head, her smile cold. "I told you, little maid, you don't understand the game. You never did." She raised the gun, pointing it at Amelia, her finger curling around the trigger. Time to end this. But before she could fire, a gunshot echoed through the warehouse. Aurora's body jerked, her eyes widening in shock. Blood bloomed on her chest, dark and red, spreading across her shirt. Her mouth opened, a gasp escaping her lips, her body swaying. She dropped the gun, her eyes locking on Amelia's, filled with disbelief, with anger, with fear. She fell to her knees, her body collapsing, hitting the floor with a heavy thud. Behind her, Ronan stood, his face pale, his body trembling, the gun shaking in his hands. His eyes were wide, his chest heaving, his shoulders slumped. He looked at Amelia, his expression haunted, broken. I couldn't let her kill you," he whispered, his voice shaking. She had to be stopped." Amelia's chest tightened, her breath catching. She looked at Aurora's lifeless body, then at Ronan, her emotions swirling. Grief, relief, shock. Martinez broke free from Aurora's men, knocking them to the ground. He rushed to Julian's side, his face pale as he checked for a pulse. His shoulders sagged with relief. He's alive, barely. Call an ambulance. Amelia's knees gave out, her body collapsing to the floor beside Julian. She cradled his head in her lap, her fingers trembling as she stroked his hair, tears streaming down her face. "Julian, please, stay with me." His eyes fluttered, his face contorting with pain. He looked up at her, his gaze unfocused, his lips moving. "Amelia, I'm sorry." "Don't you dare," she choked out, her voice breaking. "Don't you dare apologize. You're going to be okay. You hear me? You're going to be okay." His eyes softened, his lips curving into a faint smile. I never stopped loving you?" His voice was weak, his eyes drifting shut, his body went limp, his breathing shallow. Amelia's heart shattered, her body shaking with sobs. She clung to him, her fingers curling into his shirt, her tears soaking his chest. "Julian, please, don't leave me. I can't do this without you." Ronan dropped the gun, his body sinking to the floor. He looked at Aurora's body, his face pale, his eyes hollow. "It's over. It's finally over." Amelia looked up, her vision blurred with tears, her body shaking. She looked at Aurora's lifeless body, at Julian's pale face, at the blood on her hands. It was over? But at what cost? Aurora's face twisted in fury, but she said nothing as Martinez led her away, her head held high, her posture rigid. Even in defeat, she exuded defiance, her eyes cold and unyielding. The men who had worked for her were taken into custody, their faces grim, their shoulders slumped. They knew it was over. The empire Aurora had built was crumbling, and they were going down with it. Amelia stood there, numb, watching them all being led away. It was over. After all the lies, the danger, the fear, Aurora was finally going to face justice. But as she watched the police cars pull away, their lights flashing against the darkening sky, she didn't feel triumphant. She felt empty, hollow, as if a part of her had been ripped away, leaving a gaping void in its place. Julian placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding her in the moment. "You did it," he said softly, his voice steady, warm. "It's over." Amelia nodded, her throat tight, the reality of it all not quite sinking in. She had fought for this moment, for her father, for herself, and now that it was here, it felt surreal, distant, like a dream she couldn't wake from. As the officers finished up, Martinez walked over to Amelia, his expression softening. "You did good, Amelia," he said, his voice gentle. "Your father would be proud." The words hit her harder than she expected, and for the first time in days she felt the weight of it all. The grief, the anger, the pain, the relief. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision, but they weren't just tears of sadness, they were tears of closure, of release. Her father's legacy had finally been vindicated. Aurora was going to pay for what she had done, and Amelia could finally begin to move on. But as she wiped the tears from her eyes and looked out at the darkened city beyond the warehouse, she couldn't help but wonder what her life would be like now. The fight was over, but a new chapter was about to begin, and she didn't know how to face it. Aftermath and reflection. The following days passed in a blur. News of Aurora's arrest spread quickly through the city. The headlines splashed across every newspaper and television screen. The world watched in shock as the story of corruption, fraud, and murder unfolded, revealing the dark underbelly of Aurora's empire. Amelia's name was everywhere, though the papers painted her as a hero, the woman who brought down a criminal mastermind. It felt surreal to see her life, the pain, the fear, the struggle, turned into a sensational story for public consumption. She felt exposed, vulnerable, her most private battles displayed for the world to see. But Aurora was in custody, and Ronan had turned state's witness in exchange for leniency. The files Julian and Amelia had retrieved from the estate were more than enough to bury Aurora and her family's criminal empire. Martinez assured her it was only a matter of time before Aurora was formally charged with murder, conspiracy, and a laundry list of other crimes. Amelia felt a sense of relief, but the hollowness remained. A lingering emptiness she couldn't shake. She had spent so long fighting, searching for justice, that she hadn't stopped to think about what came next. Now that the battle was over, she was left with her thoughts, her memories, and the uncertainty of a future she hadn't planned for. A new beginning. She sat in her new apartment, gazing out at the city skyline. The sunset bathed the buildings in warm, golden light, but Amelia felt a strange disconnect. The luxury that had once seemed like a dream now felt like a reminder of how much her life had changed. She had inherited a fortune, her father's name was cleared, and Aurora was going to pay for her crimes. But what did that mean for Amelia? There was a knock at the door, pulling her out of her thoughts. When she opened it, she found Julian standing there, a soft smile on his face. "Mind if I come in?" he asked. Amelia stepped aside, letting him in. He walked over to the window, his eyes scanning the city below before turning back to her. "How are you holding up?" he asked gently, his voice full of concern. Amelia shrugged, sinking onto the couch. "I don't know," she admitted. "I should feel happy, I guess, but I don't. I feel lost." Julian sat beside her, his presence comforting, steady. "That makes sense," he said. "You've spent so long fighting for justice. Now that it's over, it's hard to know what comes next." Amelia nodded, her shoulders sagging. "Exactly. I've been so focused on the past, on what Aurora did to my father, on uncovering the truth, that I never thought about the future. And now that it's here, I don't know what to do." Julian was silent for a moment, then he turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "You've been through a lot, Amelia. More than most people could ever imagine. It's going to take time to figure out what you want, but you have a clean slate now. You can start over. Do anything you want." Amelia sighed, leaning back against the couch. "That's the thing. I don't know what I want. I've spent my whole life just trying to survive, and now I have all these opportunities, but I feel empty." Julian leaned forward, his eyes softening. "You're not empty. You're free. For the first time in a long time, you're truly free." Amelia looked at him, her eyes widening. He was right. She was free. Free from the burden of the past. Free from the secrets and lies that had weighed her down for so long. She had the chance to start over, to build a life on her own terms. But what kind of life did she want? Julian reached out, his hand covering hers. "You don't have to figure it all out right now. Take it one day at a time. And if you ever need anything, well, you know where to find me." Amelia laughed softly, warmth spreading through her chest. "I might take you up on that." They sat in companionable silence, watching as the city lights began to twinkle against the fading light of the sunset. The weight that had been pressing down on Amelia's chest slowly began to lift. It wasn't gone completely, but it was lighter now, more manageable. Julian stood to leave, giving her a reassuring smile before heading to the door. "Take care of yourself, Amelia. You've earned it." Amelia nodded, watching him go as the door clicked shut behind him. She felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of it. She had faced worse and come out the other side. Whatever happened next, she knew she could handle it. The end of an era. Aurora's trial began, and with the overwhelming evidence stacked against her, it didn't take long for the jury to reach a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Watching Aurora's face as the sentence was read, Amelia felt a sense of closure she hadn't expected. Aurora's downfall was complete. Her power, her wealth, her legacy, it was all gone. Amelia moved out of the luxurious apartment and found a place of her own. A modest but comfortable home where she could finally start fresh. She wasn't interested in living the high life. That wasn't who she was. She began to rebuild her life, one day at a time. It wasn't easy, but it was real. It was hers. And for the first time in her life, Amelia was truly free. One evening, as she sat on her balcony watching the sunset, Amelia found herself lost in thought, her gaze fixed on the horizon as the sky melted into shades of gold and pink. The cool evening breeze played with her hair, whispering softly as it danced around her, carrying with it the faint hum of the bustling city below. Her fingers wrapped around a warm cup of tea, the steam curling into the air, delicate and fleeting. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the warmth seep into her hands, grounding her in the present, in the here and now. She felt the tension slowly ease from her shoulders, the weight she had carried for so long gradually lifting. She thought about her father, his smile, his laughter, his unwavering sense of integrity. She could almost hear his voice, gentle and steady, reminding her to be brave, to fight for what was right, even when the odds were against her. She wondered what he would say if he could see her now, standing tall, unbroken, victorious. Would he be proud? Would he see the woman she had become, the strength she had found within herself, the courage to face her fears, to stand up for justice, for truth? She liked to think he would be. She had fought for him, for his memory, for the man who had been stolen from her. She had fought for herself, for her own sense of justice, for the life she deserved. In the end, she had won, not just against Aurora, but against the darkness that had tried to consume her, the shadows of doubt and fear that had haunted her for so long. She had faced her demons, looked them in the eye, and refused to back down. She took a deep breath, the cool evening air filling her lungs, cleansing, invigorating. She let it out slowly, her chest rising and falling, her heart beating steadily in her chest. She felt a sense of peace settle over her, warm and comforting, like a soft blanket wrapped around her soul. For the first time in a long time, she felt free, truly free. She looked out at the city below, alive with lights, with movement, with possibility. She could hear the distant laughter, the hum of traffic, the music drifting up from the street performers below. It was a symphony of life, chaotic and beautiful, vibrant and full of hope. And for the first time, she was ready to be a part of it. She didn't have all the answers, didn't know what the future would hold, but she was no longer afraid of it. She had her life back, her choices, her freedom, her dreams. She could be anyone she wanted to be, do anything she wanted to do. A soft smile played on her lips as she watched the sun dip below the skyline, the golden light fading into twilight. She thought of Julian, his unwavering support, his quiet strength. She thought of Martinez, his guidance, his friendship. She thought of her father, his legacy living on in her, in the courage he had passed down to her. They were all a part of her story, a part of who she had become, but this was her moment, her beginning, her life to live. She closed her eyes, letting the cool breeze wash over her, feeling the weight of the past finally slip away. It was a new day, a new chapter, a new beginning, and she was ready. Amelia took one last look at the city, her heart full, her spirit unbroken. She stood up, setting her cup down, her body light, her mind clear. She turned and walked back into her apartment, her steps steady, confident. The door closed softly behind her, the sunset painting the sky in brilliant hues of pink and purple, the city lights twinkling like stars. The world was waiting for her, and she was ready to embrace it. For the first time in her life, Amelia was truly free, and that was enough. Did you enjoy this story? If so, drop a like and leave a kind comment to encourage us. Your support means the world. And don't forget, we love you.